It's Fernando Ruiz Art. I sent a friend of mine a copy of this image, a picture of this cover. And this is an old friend of mine from college, a fellow comic fan, fellow fan of the Watchmen, and a big Rorschach fan. So I wanted to let him know that there's a new Rorschach series out there, which is what we're going to be taking a look at today. And his response to this cover was, if it weren't for the big yellow letters saying Rorschach running down the side there, he wouldn't have known what this was. And I gotta say, I agree with him. I kind of understand the image a little bit more having read the book, but it is still a weird, not very tantalizing image for the cover of the first issue of a Rorschach series. Now, this is a variant cover, I guess. So the artists on variant covers are usually given a little bit more license, and they could get a little bit more off-ball and offbeat and oddballish about what they do. It's well drawn. It's certainly well painted, colored, but it is not. It's not an image that really grabbed me. So yes, this is Rorschach #1. I will say, right up front, these days, I really don't delve much into comic book news. Okay, I don't really read the comic book news sites. There really isn't much comic book news to speak of, not real comic book news. When I was a kid, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there were a lot of fanzines, fan magazines that really kept you up to date on what was happening in Spider-Man and X-Men and Fantastic Four, who the creative teams were and what was going to be coming up and happening in those books. I don't know if there's anything like that anymore. If there is, I'm generally not interested. And plus, for the purposes of these reviews, I think it's better for me to come in kind of cold. So I'm going, and that's how I am going into this issue. I haven't read anything about it. I don't know anything about it. In fact, as I started this review, I was wondering, I don't know if this is an ongoing series or a limited series. These days, everything seems to be a limited series. So I'm coming in totally cold. I know nothing about this series other than I'm a huge Watchmen fan, and I love the character of Rorschach, and I do know the Watchmen have been dabbled with in recent years, which brings me to another point before we really get into the meat of this review. Just on principle, just on a fundamental level, I'm not crazy about this. The Watchmen is a tough act to follow. The Watchmen really, and I'm talking about the original graphic novel, I'm not talking about the movie or God help us, that recent HBO series. I'm talking about the original story written by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. And I'm not even putting it up there as though it is a great, untouchable work, but it is a good work. It is a solid work. It is a work with a beginning and an ending, and it is a book with a very, very specific tone. I'm not putting Alan Moore out there as the greatest writer ever, but he writes in a very dense, specific way. He writes with a voice that is very hard for anybody else to emulate. So because of this, I would leave The Watchmen alone. I would leave. I know there's always, with comic creators, there's always that urge to pick every single scab. You can't leave any field of snow not peed on. Everything needs to be trampled upon. I would leave the Watchmen alone. And if, you know, looking at before Watchmen like I did, very little of it was good. And certainly none of it came even close to the original material. So why bother? Rorschach is a character whose story was told from beginning to end. So why are we here? So that those are my thoughts going into this. Having said that, I go into this and with the curiosity, and let's see what they have. Now, art wise, not bad. There's kind of this. It kind of looks like David Mazzucchelli's work on Batman Year One. You know, there's kind of this simplicity to the characters' faces. A detailed yet simple at the same time kind of background, real background. You know, everything is clear. It's clear what's going on. It's clear. There's no guesswork as to the storytelling here. The story is being told fairly clearly. There's a few little compositional attempts at trying to do what Dave Gibbons did on The Watchmen, you know, with the way some things are very subtly framed, or the way the camera will linger on props and things. So there's that. I didn't have any issues with the artwork. I think it served the story well. You know, is this my favorite art? No, not really, but it's okay. It's okay for the issue. Now, story wise, well, okay, we start out with Rorschach getting gunned down, and we find out, of course, that this was Rorschach and a girl. Actually, what we find out is this is a very old man and a girl. And listen, if I guess it's too late for any spoiler warnings, but I'm going to talk about this in detail. So this guy dressed as Rorschach, a very old man, he's in his 80s, dressed as Rorschach, and a girl are killed because they were trying to, or at least they had the sniper rifle, and they were going to kill a presidential candidate. Now, there is references here to a President Redford. So this is obviously after the events of Watchmen. It isn't until later that we find out that the year is 2020. At least if there were references to that early on in this, I didn't catch them. But it is 2020. I guess it is the aftermath of the Watchmen graphic novel. I don't know if the TV show, the TV series, the HBO show factors into this at all. There was a reference to Oklahoma. So that kind of made me wonder, but I don't know. Everything, and I'm looking at this one scene here. In this scene, we're dropped into this scene very early on at the beginning of the whole thing. And we have two guys, and I say that with a question mark because I'm not exactly sure what their roles are. They're like the investigators, campaign riggers. I don't know, but they're in charge of investigating this whole this attempt on this candidate's life. So they're trying to figure out who this guy was who's dressed as Rorschach. The conversation here, very dense and not very interesting. Dense and not in a compelling way. You know, I get what the writer's trying to do. He's trying to do a little world building by dropping you into the middle of a conversation without really doing much, without any straight up exposition. But it's a little too gilded. It's a little hard to follow, and again, it's not compelling me enough. It's not interesting me enough to make the effort to follow it. Okay. So we go on. The whole thing is this mystery. Who were these people? Who was this young girl? Who was this old guy? They talk about the old guy being a comic book artist who had drawn some of the pirate comics. I guess maybe some of those pirate comics that we saw in the original Watchmen graphic novel. Throughout, there isn't much to really build this world as being that same world that we saw in Watchmen. The technology is weirdly undated. For example, there are computers, but there's also like 80s style telephones, and nobody has cell phones. And I think that was one of the things that was talked about in the TV show, but I'm not exactly sure how that fits into things. So we learn, or at least one of the things that, see, they have pagers, and people need phones because they're walking around with phones, and we have tape recordings. So the technology is kind of weird. And it really, again, there's nothing, at least so far, to say this is that same Watchmen world. I think I did see a blimp somewhere. Oh, there we go. There's a blimp. But it doesn't look familiar in any other way. And there's a couple of references to some of the characters, but that's about it. But then we find out that this 80-year-old man, he has fingerprints that matches Walter Kovacs, the original Watchman. So the impression here is that this 80-year-old guy was the original Watchman, or the original Rorschach. Where we go from there, that's in subsequent issues. So bottom line here, will I be back? Probably not. I won't say this was bad. I was entertained in that I was curious enough to keep turning pages. I was curious enough to see where this goes. This is sort of the best way to describe this experience is that I went along for the ride. I'm not sure I enjoyed where the ride got me. Okay, so overall, final number, to put a grade on this. The art isn't bad. I guess I'll give it a 2. A 2. I might bump it up to a 2.5. If you're a real Rorschach fan, you're not going to see much Rorschaching in this. It's mostly this guy who isn't all that interesting, this guy investigating the thing, who isn't all that interesting. What you do see of Rorschach, he's killing cops, so we're not really seeing Rorschach in all his typical glory. I guess it's hard to compare this back to the Watchmen, but I think back to the original Watchmen #1, and in that first issue, I was hooked right away. I'm not hooked here. There was a ton of world building just in that one issue. In that first issue, we had Rorschach, who was investigating a crime, and he took us through all the main characters. We got to meet all the main characters. This doesn't give us much of that. Things are still a little too hidden, too veiled, and I'm not sure there's enough there hooking me to look under this veil. So a 2, a solid 2. The art isn't bad. Maybe check it out if you're really curious, but otherwise maybe save that money for another book. All right, that's my thoughts on this one. If you like this review, click like, and if you read this and you have some thoughts, put them down in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I got a lot more reviews coming up this week because I've been reading over the holidays. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.